The Magic. By Giordano Bruno, the Nolan. Before and out of his magic, as before thee of any kind of subject, discussing the subject, the name into its meanings is to be divided. Of magic, however, they are pointed to the same number, how many and magi. A magician, the first is taken for the wise man, which kind of word Trimegisty among the Egyptians, Druids among the Gauls, Gymnos, among the Indians, Kabbalistarum among the Hebrews, there came wise men among the Persians, and that the Zoroaster, Sophie, among the Greeks, the wise men among the Latins. The second is taken a magician. Instead of doing the wonderful things, the mere application of active and passive elements, such as medicine and chemistry as to the genus, and this is the natural magic of the commonly so called. Third, the magic is magic when they are added to the circumstances of this kind, or of the intelligence of the upper country to rouse the admiration which they appear by means of the appearance of the works of nature, and there is this species which the illusionist is called. Fourthly, when he from the antipathies and sympathies of things that might, to which repulsed by the things that transform and attract, as they are the species of the magnet and the like, whose assistance was not to the active and passive qualities are reduced, but all things exist in things and they are referred to the spirit or soul, and this is properly called the natural magic. Add to these the words of the fifth with, the singing, and the types of numbers and the times, the images, the figure, the seals, the characters or of the letter, and this is also the more the medium between the natural and supernatural or above, and which, properly speaking, magic, the mathematician would inscribe the name of the secret of the philosophy of tradition has come nearer en masse. Sixthly, if the invocation of intelligence, of the efficiency of these accessit of worship, or of external or higher, with the prayers, consecrations, a censer, sacrifices, and at certain habits and ceremonies to the gods, the demons, and the heroes, then he either becomes to contract at the end of the very in itself the spirit, of which he is becoming a vessel, an instrument, that it might appear a wise of things, which, however, the spirit of wisdom, together with the drug may be able to be easily to empty out, and this is the magic of desperate, that are made by the vessels of evil demons, which by means of magic exocupator, either it is of higher authority with the lesser demons of command to the end of rule, and the prince of the demons, even these men were worshipping and enticing of the latter, but this adjuration to the confederacy, and to Titan. And this magic is magic transnaturalis or metaphysics, and his own name is called Kyrgia. Is an adjuration or the seventh, or the invocation, not to the devils and the heroes, but we take these to the men who are dead. Souls of them that have invited and, by means of or parts of their corpses to the oracle of the dead bodies of some of them for receiving the divine, that I may know about the affairs of the absence of the end to come, from matter and at the end, and this species is called necromancy. If the matter does not go there, but there was a Spirit in the heart of a brooding invocation by energumen ** excantant oracle investigated, then the magician, which is a familiar name, of that in the temple of the Pythian Apollo, for so they were accustomed to from they inspiritary, so to speak. In the eighth, or the enchantment of the parts and things, no matter how he had received them come near, the garments, excrements, and the excess, are believed to have conceived the tracks, and all that by the touch of some kind of communication, and then these things come to, or to loose, binding and invalidate are, then they constitute a magician, which is called the crime, if they tend to evil, if to the good. To the number of physicians are referred to, in accordance with a certain appearance and character of the way of medicine, or aspire to the ultimate destruction and death, the wise men, sorcerers call. Ninth, there came wise men are said to be in any way about the affairs of the absence of the divine, and to come to thee all those who made themselves ready for, and these are called generally by the end of the divine, of which there are 4 species. Of first, or of the principles of material, fire, air, water, and earth, wherefore they are called pyromancy, necromancy, geomancy, from the 3 objects of knowledge, either the natural, the mathematician and divine. And then there are the various other species of divination. For natural or physical inspection from the beginning of that divine augurs, and soothsayers, and the rest of the like, by the mathematician inspection in accordance with a class, are that geomancy, who by means of numbers or letters or lines and shapes, keeping of, as well as the appearance of the radiation and the situation of the planets and the like, they foretell, from the divine, of the use of that sacred names, encounters of the places, with short, certain aspects of they, and the prescribed circumstances, and these are not listed the last names of the wise men of our country, for an unworthy person, with whom the sorcerer usurpation ill it sounds, but it is not magic, but the prophecy. Finally, he is a magician. And magic of the significance of the unworthy, that among these are not included in either full reckoning, so that the magician is a wizard, no matter how stupid, that of dealing with a demon, and the ability to hurt or be supported by some kind of informed, and according to this argument, it sounds as sages, or they themselves do not before the grammarians, but is used by some to the name of the Magi and like, such as it was he who made the book of the hammer evil deeds, and thus today is used by all of this kind of writers, as may be read though before they apostles, catechisms that is ignorant and dreams of elders. The name of they, then, there came wise men when it is used, or they may be taken before it is defined with a distinction, or if one takes absolutely, then according to the commandment of Aristotle in logic and in a special way in v. The topics for most of the noblest of it hath been signified may be taken, as is taken from the philosophers among the philosophers, then it signifies a man wise and a magician with the power of acting. It stands, however, that it is taken for him which in general terms is signified simply uttered, and then with a single one and the other are ancient and other common is the voice of the genus, with a lot of speculate about that. The vile spirits he who is called the devil, otherwise the behavior of divers nations, and according to the common belief. This distinction is generally Magic 3 after taking the divine, physics, and mathematics. The first sort is necessarily good of its kind and the best of magic, and of the second kind, of the third, however, of the genus. And is good and bad, as may be more for the same good and for evil use. Although in the operations of many kinds of these three things concur, principle, malice, however, idolatry, wickedness, and like the crime of idolatry is found in the third category, where it is possible to err and be deceived, and the use of it is converted to evil, by means of which, according to the kind of good in itself. At this point, kind of not named after the species of mathematics, a mathematical commonly so called, as geometry, arithmetic, astronomy, optics, music and so on. But from the resemblance and affinity of these, for it has a likeness to the geometry for the sake of figures and characterization, when, on account of the enchantment of the music, with arithmetic for the sake of numbers, times, and with the astronomy for the sake of time and motion, with the optics for the sake of fascination, and, in general, he and all kind of mathematics, on account of the working of the divine or the fact that he or mediates between the natural or shares of both of these, or is less than from both parties, as a sort of participation in the middle are for the sake of both extremes, a kind of truth for the sake of both the exclusion of, and in this sense it may be said, not only in the middle, as far as the third of a class, not only between the two, as far as outside of both. From what has been said, however, the appearances of it is clear how the divine, how physical, how are other from these is the species. But in order to come to particular way, more attention is paid on behalf of the axiom, in all the works before. The eyes of to have then, to flow in God in the gods against, the celestial bodies or, the stars which are corporeal deities, the stars and demons, who are the worshippers, and that the inhabitants of the stars, of which the one of which is the earth, the demons into its elements, the elements in a mixture, mixed together in the sense, the feeling in the soul and the whole animal, and this is the descent of the latter, as soon as he went up to an animal through the mind to the senses, through the senses in a mixture, by mixing it in the elements, and through these into the demons, by means of these into its elements, by means of these into the stars, through her, in that incorporeal or ethereal substances or the gods as corporeal, by means of these into the soul of the world, or the spirit of the universe, through this man is in the contemplation of the one into thorough contact with the great and good a simplest, of the absolute, of a. In this way, the descent is from God throughout the world, to an animal, of the animal, however, is the raising up through the world to God, he it is. In the tops of the latter, a pure act and the active power, the light of the most pure, on the latter, however. The root is the matter of the darkness, the pure passive power, and so shall the potent it becomes all things. From the depths, even as he is able to do all things from the heavenly things. Between the lowest and the highest degree are intermediate species, where the upper has been treated and the power of the light and the more they participate in the active, and the lower the darkness rather, power, and the power of the passive. Hence, all the light, which is in the lower, when it comes to these things by the higher reaches, is the eminent, is in the upper, likewise, all the darkness, which are in the higher, the stronger they are in the lower. Although this theory is not impartial in efficacy of darkness and of light, for the light pours out, and penetrates even to the lowest depths and the deep things of darkness, the darkness of the most pure orb of light. Touch on the other hand, it is not so, but he went the light comprehends the darkness, conquers and overcomes they. Over the infinite, they do not comprehend, nor to say nothing of the odd number nor the darkness the other hand. For smoothing the light, but surprisingly deficient as compared to the proportion of that. According to the three levels of the three predictions are more of the world are understood, the archetype, the natural philosopher, and the rational. In the friendship and is the archetype of the litigation, in the physical. Fire and the water in mathematics, light and darkness. The light and the darkness they go down by the fire and water, fire, and the water from the coherence and discord, and so, the first world to produce a third by the second, and the third is reflected back to the first by the second. Passing over these, which to her superstitious have regard to the principles of magic, which, such as they are unworthy of the common people, to the contemplation of be turned on only those, which are conducive to the supply of wisdom, and they best of the talent may be enough, although we take no kind of knowledge and a knowledge of magic is unworthy. Since every science is good of its kind, just as Aristotle says in the introduction of On the Soul, the same. Thomas to contemplative theologians ouch it, with things more than others, and yet of every ought to be given by a heathen and he aggravated the common people and in the multitude at a distance, since it produces no thus they. Good of it is that by the destruction of the wicked, and the sacrilegious wretch of humanity, in and of itself, sinful youth, rather than to the benefit of a partner of the genus may turn. In general, there are two kinds as the efficient cause, the nature and the will. As soon as the will is threefold, the person, human, demon, and the divine things. Nature in the present case is of two kinds, intrinsic and extrinsic. The intrinsic still is twofold, the matter or the subject of, and the form with the power of the natural. Extrinsic also twofold, the effigy of things which have more of nature, it is said, a trace, and the shadow, or light, and the things of the remains in a thing and on the surface of the subject, as the light and the heat in the sun and in other hot climates, and those which emanates and flows out from the subject, as the light which is poured out from the sun and is found in the things of being enlightened, and with the light in the sun and the heat which is found in things is heated. From the contemplation of these causes we can to come down to the numbers, or the production of these effects from the first cause to spread by means of the power of the middle, even to the most immediate and the lowest things, by limiting the universal cause, which does not look back. For more, this subject than that, arranging more of this subject than it is disposed to a particular effect. Since standing the same cause, and the power of the immutable cause, subjection, and the administration of the matter of a contrary for a different, not only different, effects are produced, so that for part of the beginning of an efficient one and simple is enough for it, just as one sun, one of the heat and the light of a single conversion, and a turning away, coming near to, and far removal, both mediately and immediately makes the winter, summer, the weather, and of orders of various and contrary dispositions. From this same matter, if we wish to believe, commonly named them that they suspect that the elements of one another, changeable, of which the prince was Plato, who is content to an efficient one of all the matter and once in a great production. But whatever it is, concerning the operation of comparison with the first act of an universal, whether the principles of material things he assumes is the one thing or many things, whatsoever it is, in general, of secondary causes, whether it be a man exists or a demon, it is that the materials according to the multitude and variety of the species of practical matters and recognize the many, and had the act or form, by means of which may be subject to pour something out of themselves, or virtues or of forms of accidents which are from subject to subject they are carried down, others are manifest as what are, in general, the active and passive qualities, and of those which immediately follow them, as they are to cool, heat, moisture or to dry, softens to harden, to gather together to separate, also, some are they. Effect of accord with the hidden secret, that I may for nothing delights to be sorrowful, the appetite, whether the tedium of a putting in fear and boldness, as they are the species of the extrinsic motive by the work of the cogitative power in man, and the estimative power in from the brutes call it, which the child or an infant, without any further when they saw the serpent, a wolf, a sheep, or having seen the conceives the image or the fear of death or of the destruction of hostility and of his own experience, and the reason is related to the internal sense, which, of course, from the species by foreign rouse himself, and mediately, however, for nature as it gave a form to exist, as well as in the present state of maintaining himself an appetite to a thing, so also impressed on the internal a certain spirit, or the sense of you prefer to be called, in all respects, by which the worst enemy of no and let them out of a certain superscription, which is not only in the example of the species where we see, but also in all which, sorted, they seem to be short and incomplete, in which the present species are conserved, if you desire, nevertheless, is in the spirit according to their ability to all, he himself was in the drops of falling, which, not to let them fall, they became crowded together, and in those things which have fallen, which may not flow away and dispersed, and to the globe to the center of efforts to try to support it with his own parts, likewise, in the straw, or twigs into the fire of brush, and the membranes or membranes, which leap about and in a way the corruption of his own fly from. At this point, there is a certain sense, indeed, in all things the mere admission in life, instead of the usual of the common people whom we do not say of the soul, a particular referring to the soul, since it kind of creatures those parts of the names may be applied, in the order of, however, of the universe, which the spirit of one of them on every side, which spreading, and the feeling of be around for the according to the capacity of the thing feels sort of affects and passions, in all things lawful for to contemplate. For as the soul out of our first all over his body and, in general, to prolong the whole work, and soon after, however, even though it exists as a whole in the whole and whole in every part, it does not for that reason wholly makes things out of the whole, and the whole from every part, but it makes in the eye to see, to hear in the ear, to taste it in the mouth, which if it was in every place the eye, on every side, saw that if they were everywhere, of all the organs of the senses, they felt on all sides, at all, so also the soul of the world in the whole world, no matter where it had obtained such a matter, there is such a thing produces the subject, and the result is such, utters the operations. Though, then, equally, it is everywhere, is not equally in all places, acts, for it is not equally disposed to him, the matter is ministered everywhere. In this way, therefore, as the whole soul is in the whole body, and in the bones and in the veins and in the heart, is no more present to one as to the other party, and no less than all things and in all things, than the present to one, yet this man has done the stalks to be stalks, there is to be a vein of the vein of is, there is to be the blood of the blood, there is the heart to be a heart. And in order that by means of the intrinsic or extrinsic such men are to be changed, either through the efficient passive principle, so is the act of the soul somewhere else, and someone else to be done, it is inevitable. This is the most important principle and root of all the principles, in order to give a reason, of all the mighty works wrought by our in nature, namely, that on the part of the principle of active life, and the spirit or universal soul, nothing is so begun, remain incomplete and imperfect, and at length to the eyes of an opinion scorned, that it cannot be a source of major operations, on the contrary, for the most part not based on the of this kind ought to be given. That the new, as it were, the world is generated from them. Whatever it is more bronze than gold, for the ashes of the air, and of that more like than the perfection of the ashes from the air, in this case, however, in the transmutation of the ashes of the air is more akin to that of gold than bronze is, as we also see the seeds of all the things that are next to it to be produced of the species, they may be more nearly to approach this these species, like unto the close and ever so than the other species of related. And someone who believes otherwise is at the same level, thinking that the monkey is more easily to be able to be formed into the man than of the seed was thrown upon his in the womb, which was very near nourishment, or of the bread. Nevertheless, however, it is necessary to be present at the likeness of the production and of the same form of that species in all, as in the productions of art, from the exemplar, which is in the mind of the artist, a house is made and garment, in the production of the natural from the model, which is close to the matter forming, and are produced and are defined species of things, nourishment as we see the same species, and addresses to be converted into the substance of the same heaven, the water, the dog is man to man, the cat into a cat, and a dog gives birth to a dog by the same thing, man to man, where it is open, it is for the sake of the cause of the idea that the whole of the crisis, which is presented to it in all places, and after that is limited to the latter, and that species of nature in general, in order that this or that is nearer. In this way, and a magician, whoever wills to perfect the works of the like nature, which in the main let him know the ideals, principles, and specific, indeed, from the species, who will soon numerable to the number of, or an individual to the individual. From here it the image of the manufacturer and the material substances thus formed, a portion of, and shall not, without evident cause. And the astrologers, and the philosophy of the power of confirming the effect, many of the damage and to take medicine intended for certain figures with what is certain is exercised by the parties, or those things which have some communication, participation, or they have a much tact with the thing maleficanda, and so the work is contracted and is limited to a certain individual. And from the experience of these things, to others prater misses reasons, it is obvious every soul and the spirit in possession of a continuity with the spirit of the universe, as not only is there meant to be and to be included where it feels, where it gives life, but also in its essence and the substance of it be diffused through the vast. They felt that many of the Platonists and Pythagoreans. Hence it is that the species most distant of a vision he laid hold on a sudden, without motion, without this, namely, that goes forward in the eye or the thing. With my eyes on a sudden to the stars, or hastily got together by the stars to the eye. Moreover, the power of the mind is present in a certain way he and his universe, inasmuch as such a substance, which is not included to the body of the living by it, even though the same were obligated, bound on. Therefore, the removal of certain impediments, we will immediately present has the appearance of having suddenly remote, which is not a result of movement. They are united, so that no one will deny, hence, the presence of a him, and experience teaches, in ourselves, who have their noses cut off, the flesh develops by those of others they have made for themselves a new member, for the day of the death of the owner of it was the flesh, according to the manner in which to decay his body, he also borrowed the nose to decay. Hence it is manifest that the lives of more things without rhyme or outside of the body, throughout the whole horizon of his nature. Hence it happened that he knows not only its members, but also the communion of all with whom he contracted, and of some use, and participation. Nor is there any argument that stupid they bring, being without, however, of the philosophy of principle, which he does not feel one thing to another through touching, is the truth as was in fact in one way, by distinguishing species from the species, an individual from the individual. A distinction, however, is a false part, from the point of view. For just as the bridegroom of the finger, or with a needle pupigurate one, if any one part of the body, the whole body is disturbed from time to time in accordance with all the members, in accordance with that part only, and is not, even though on the west side should be alone. 14 Thessalonians, so they may have a continuation of one of each with the soul. When the mind of the universe, it does not follow the impossibility of it, which is referred in the bodies, which do not enter each other, for in the spiritual substances of this kind, one is the reason. For instance, if they are of lighted innumerable lamps, which come together in the power of one of the light, it does not deaden. It happened that he who impedes or another and another, or exclude the light, the same is diffused out of the air with many voices at the same time by the same, and also of the many roots visuals, so that we speak after the manner of the common people, because the whole and conceiving, to the same thing are explained in the visible, where all they penetrate through the same medium, and others obliquely, and they are right, and not because each other on, baffle, so spread over the space of innumerable spirits and souls of through the same thing, does not preclude each other, so that the diffusion of a single diffusion of an unlimited number of other hindrance to action. This virtue, since it is not only the soul, but also of certain of accidents, as of the voice, of light, of sight, that concept by which the soul is whole in the whole and every part of the body, and the whole of his whole species out of the body close to each other are different, and he laid hold on very secluded, it is a sign that, according to the substance of the act for the first time, and it is not included within the body, not, forsooth, is a circumscribed fashion in the body, but definitively second acts in him and according to him, only to be explained. Behold, the princes of the effects of many souls, who have to marvel at what they do, the cause is brought, the reason and the power of which is sought, nor the inferior part of the condition of the soul and ought to be the substance of these are divine, than the accidents that proceed from these as his effect, vestiges and shadows as well. If I say, the voice of the acts outside the body of its own, in which it arises, and it is entirely in the ears of the innumerable round about, why not the whole of it ought to be in different places and the portion of that substance which is the voice of the produces, and bound to a definite members? To this it is also observed that while the idioms the ears of the notice to all things secret, not of intelligence or intelligence, for the words, which are derived from the training of individuals, but not so takes cognizance, is same as the words to be natural. Because of this, a tune, especially one of these be the tragic, for example, Plotinus notes, in doubtful things attitude was the greatest derive their efficacy. In like manner, Also, all the scriptures are not its importance, of which they are the characteristics of those who have the leadership, and the form of the thing itself declares with certainty, so that there is signs in one another, bowed together, and each other, are to be holding fast, constricting to the love of, however, against the rebels. Destroyed by hatred and divorce, chopped terms, the destruction of the burst, node to bonds, is explained by the characteristics of to its dissolution. And these are not in a kind of a certain and definite form, but any it. All, on behalf of the dictate of his madness or impetus of his spirit, in the actual accomplishment of the work itself, such as the desires or anything which curse, and, as it so however much they may present the matter to a God who is the experience of a certain eagerness, designating certain powers of the nodes, even the may, as if no words, shall attain and developed by word or thought the writing test. Such were the letter of the among the Egyptians it more convenient for defined, which are called hieroglyphics, or sacred characters, for you have designated for each of these topics the images of the extracts from the things of nature, or they were certain of their parts, such writings and the use of such terms used in which the making of the Egyptian gods, conversations. At the wonderful execution, after he discovered through Tuda or by any other kind of which we at this day, were found with the other industry in this respect the letter of the genus, as well as the divine knowledge and magic of the memory, the greatest extent possible loss has been made. And so to this day with some manner of the likeness of their images, having described the characters, and one ceremony, which consist in a certain gesture and a kind of worship, as it were, by means of indeed brought about by their vows to explain the more those that are understood, and this is that the language of the gods, which always remains to all others and every day 1,000 times without change of the same, as do the species of nature remains the same. For the same reason we deities addressed through visions, dreams, and weaken riddles called but because of the ignorance and stupidity of use of our capacity, however, are the very words and the very terms of the represented, now, just as the voices of these are related to our comprehension, and therefore which indeed they are themselves of are they voices of the Latin, Greek, Italian, that I may at some time be heard and understood by the deities, the higher and the eternal things there, who differ from us in the species, so that it is not easy for us to be able to be communication with them, more than the eagles of with men. Just as men are of the same genus is not a conversation with the men of the communion of the spoken languages, nor without the contraction of a different kind, except by the command, so the stock of deities and to us with is certain, not only by means of defined certain signs, seals, figures, the characters, the gestures and other ceremonies, there can be sharing. Therefore, more especially those species, which you acknowledge is no such words and writings hardly any magician can promote, out of respect for the community or company events. From this it is to believe and to consider the reason may be, by which not only action is to things present, but also to have been removed according to the sense, for in reality, as stated above is, by the unity of the Spirit of the universal, which is the whole in the whole and in each part of the world. Hence, it turns out, so that just as the space of different lights at the same time in the same run together, so there are diverse on the power or act, according to the finite or an infinite number of souls in the universe are associated together in accordance with the bodies of the not so much, the surface or the circumference of whose being is defined as a circumscribed fashion from one's own, and which according to the different parts of the also in the many different kinds, and innumerable places consist, the place where we understand the space. In this way, then, the body can act on the body in any way, nor matter into matter, nor of the same parts of matter into other parts of the body, and of the body able to act, but every action is affected by the quality, from the form, and at last from the soul. The first change the regulations that then change the arrangements of the bodies. In this way, the body acts into the body of the consent of the parties for a certain distance and in the neighborhood, and in their own copula, and the union, which is a form, and because therefore it is governed or in a spirit that some parts of the body from the soul connecting everything, and it happens to the other is everywhere and on all sides. One soul to act upon the nearest to it, so, too, necessarily it turns out, to act on the body, no matter where. That is which is supplies to his soul, and he is subject to indissoluble. And I will go to the body of the continuation of the soul that know it how to a kind of necessity, therefore, to forms of this, it will have the principle of no small, as well as to live and work, as well as to the contemplation of the better opinion regarding the processes of nature. And hence it will be the basis by which the prompt is not given to the empty space, namely the space without the body, neither for the body is one from one place to give way unless being succeeded by the other. For the soul is in the life of his own body failed him, even the whole, however, the body cannot be abandoned by some, if you prefer the day from all his body, or if he be deprived of, for one thing, leaving a simple or compound, then into the second or composite or simple is offered, it is forestalled by another, or from one body being left or are relieved. So has the indissoluble link to the universal matter, when therefore, of the same nature is continuous in all and every place, everywhere a corporeal matter which avails, recognizes. Hence it follows, for example, that it is the conclusion of the space of void does not exist apart from the body, but to be empty them succeed in as much as the space in which the different bodies for themselves end are moved. For this reason, continuous motion is the one to the parts of the body of the other parts of the body, namely, the space of continuous and not interrupted as it were, through the medium of a vacuum between the more and more full, except the empty space in which we wish to call the space of no body is sensible. 18 Thessalonians. The body of a truth which is continuous is insensible body, the spirit that is to say the air or the ethereal, and it is activissimum and the most effective, since it most intimately connected with the soul, on account of resemblance to the more it recedes from the grossness of a less acute of sensible substances are composite things. To be insensible bodies and spirits of these efficacy, insensible bodies themselves of all things, and by whom truly is a virtue, indicates air spirit himself, who he dispels the sea and shakes the universe, and the most invincible and impetuosity of the winds, who is the most gracious air with the purest existing shakes the earth, breaks the trees he levelled the buildings. Lucretius, as of the highest notes, this is a spiritual body which produces all things in the sensible things themselves, from which they did not believe many of the philosophers to differ from the soul itself, whence the saying of the poet, whatever fire they are able to is, it is the air. Fire, too, who are not in the gross material consists, as coals, and wherefore they are called the fiery bodies, did not differ be understood otherwise than by the air accident a certain individual. On the contrary, the true fire is the true spirit, who is in ignited objects is consistent, numbing, out by fire. It tends, in a flame is in the middle of a kind of disposition, as it were, the motion of a certain individual. By means of this diverse and the spirit of the bodies of animals are formed in different ways. If you do not all bodies are composed are the animals, yet all living beings to understand it is proper, that is to say in all of one class of the soul, although it is not one and the same act, dispositions, and on account of other ideas and other aspects of the matter exposed to. Hence it happens, that since they are different forms and contrary to one another, and do not the difference, and not by reason of which he had formerly concur with the others, so, too, are the opposite of a conveyance that an abundance of places, and other things shall follow them and flee away from others, and some other things, sets out the condition that the entire A of the composition, and that all things desire to be preserved in its proper existence, so also is the place of one's own unwilling by the consistency of preservation and are resistant to tear asunder and not without a strong resistance, which is so strong that it did not exist before the space of the sun or of fire the water draws upon itself through the air. As little as he likened the air, namely, to turn on the heat stability, that had been accomplished, then that substance, not unwillingly, which the water had been drawn, but at the same the impact of which we are allured, as it were, by himself, even though he contends that by consenting to, and so, little by little, more and more, to the likeness of fire drew near, and, finally becomes the fire itself. In contrast, the body, in the form of fire, the most subtle of breath, clotted or crass essence the water remicrobate contrary order form. Thus, therefore, from water to vapor, from the steam into the air, the ethereal body is of the same substance by the air and matter into very small and penetrativissimum is made, changing of whom the Egyptians, Moses, Diogenes of Apollonia, they call the spirit, but they differ, for Moses does not distinguish the spirit from the soul, from The published words, we do not judge of, for her sense, they distinguished them. The other substance is dry ore. There are only atoms, which are the bodies are indissoluble, the most solid, the continuity of which have per se no, nor divisibility, and therefore interchangeable they are not in another body, for the waters, or the substance of the spirit or of the air, which is the same, they would never move into the substance of atoms, or the of dry land, nor vice versa. The sum of and the divine and the true one, as most in harmony with the nature, philosophy is, which are they? Principles of things, he put water on it, or the abyss, which is the Styx, as well as the dry land or the land. Or atoms, it is not, I say, the earth, as well as the spirit or the air or soul, and the fourth the light, for if these things are so distinct from each other, so that one cannot be transformed at any time in the nature of another, but are associated with these and may well work together, where the more so, where the less, where everything is where some of them of the motion of things, have double the attraction. The movement of things is of two kinds, the natural and the preternatural, who is from an intrinsic principle of natural, preternatural, who from an extrinsic principle, which is in keeping with nature and also the natural of solid, or generation, preternatural those who do not. And here is twofold, violent motion, which is contrary to nature, ordered or coordinabilis that does not conflict with nature. Natural motion, commonly speaking, according to all kinds or all the categories we possess it, thus failing to discern between motion and change. On this, their movements and all of the other species of abandoning them, we say about the motion in respect of place. Considering the very being of the natural two parts, the naturally appointed, and for the particular place of the other things that live by, and this motion is either circular, or circular movement of imitates the there is another natural things did not naturally appointed, and for this motion is a right angle. For a proper air moves to fill the void, line a stone through the air, and the bodies through the water, it penetrates it more serious. Are reported that a place, in which even rest naturally or moved, they may have, are right, as far as possible. The contrary she fled from the other hand, as smoke, steam, water from the fire, for it is by the line is quickly moved to distant spheres is brought, also the line tends to a similar like and suitable to himself, to do the straw to amber, iron to a magnet, so that better and better to rest altogether or moved. There is a third species of movement, which is the of the parts of the flow and the influx of all, and by all the physical bodies, which are round about on all sides by themselves something according to the character of other cases to the manifold, and this motion is called in the present spherical. For it is not according to one straight line or as a from the mean, or that he may to the middle, or near the middle, but according to the center of an infinite number of lines, as it were by the same person, since all bodies from the whole shake off its vaulted the perimeter of a thing, and they emit, or from the internal surface, and again he is also in itself she received the deposit. Grow up, however, and the invigorated, the influx of a kind of affinity goes beyond the outpouring. On the other hand, however, they grow old, decline, become torpid, when the influx of strangers, and things' natural outflow becomes larger, and at last, from this the cause of the corruption is in and changed things, which all, or a change of the change and the dissolution of they. On the two movements of the first kind, there is no controversy, according to the sense, so that their consideration and the enumeration is disseminated. The third is not more deeply, however, when we consider the way the real and agreeable, but also needed to be found. He is the most sensible in them, which is the most they have a sensible qualities, as in fire, those who do not to one side or one part of the heats, but around on every side, when he suddenly into activity, from all sides around the inflamed. It gives light, so also that voice, the sound, the middle, designed for evenly on all sides around it, penetrates evenly on all sides. Also, according to the sense of smell, is fragrant immediately clear from the facts that some aspects of flow, for the accident without specific parts or certain substance with putrid combination, circumprogreditur. In like manner, with the species, the idol, and countless others, accidents with what is certain some parts of the accidents of this kind, poured out of sensible things, which are remote from the least of them, indeed, a wonderful way the parts of sensible things, more sweetly scented for many years, as it is manifest, too, in certain cases which, no matter how small measure of quantity, beyond this kind of sensible qualities or virtues, which are transmitted from the bodies around the sphaeraliter, there are also other, to the spiritual and duller, not only into the body and on the sense which they do, but also in the deeper spirit, and the more profound than the faculties of the soul, and touch upon instilling in them the least the passions and they passions, as was noised about the virtue of many of the stones, roots, and minerals. It is clear, the item in the fascinations, and in those things which are perfected by means of the eyes of the cast of an active and a passive sense, as by a rule or by looking at the sight of the line of battle from afar, it destroys the man. How does a magnet attract iron, coral blood, and so on? XXII, while the system from all this it follows, by which a magnet attracts one kind after another. Moreover, the attraction is of two kinds, some are due to the consent of, so that when the parts are moved to its whole, things placed to its own place, and the like are carried away from similar, an agreement from making suitable, is without the consent of the other, such as when it is drawn by hand, because of the victory of the opposite of that, which cannot escape it, such as when it carried away by the moisture from the fire, as is evident in the basin offerings made by fire laid on the basin of water which contains them, the virtue of heat which is sipped, that they may rapidly go up. The same thing is it clear to those who are in the sea in a vortex and spinning of examination, so that, sometimes, the ships, which throw the waves on high to a great distance of things unseen. Is that really caught up? 3 ways. In one way, by the forms of sensible things, as in the realm of only they numbered, and is also known as the attraction and absorption of the air where, when in the air, there are also those things which are attracted, and it is clear that even in the guns, by means of which the water is sipped, to every local differences in the ascending order by progressing the reason in question, because, when the fistula is the content of the inhaled air, the air on the place of that when a man cannot succeed, for success in water, or earth or something else that they fill space. If no follow, the air force of the reduced space is retained, as is sometimes exigentibus or ebibantibus opening blocked, the tongue or lips by means of compressed air and opening tenaciously stick and vice versa suckers, so that their time can be extracted from the rekindling of the spirit of the repair or which had been abstracted from the place, or the space of. There is also another species of insensible of attraction, by which a magnet attracts iron, of which we cannot relate it to the notion of a vacuum or the like, but only to the emanations from all of the parts of bodies, or of atoms. It turns out, for example, where the atoms of one of the atoms of the same or closely related congenia or procreant species come and mutual occur, then kindled the desire and impulse of one body to another, and then the whole thing might be more powerful to defeat the motion, for all the parts of the landing to which they have, and the whole it is necessary to apply this sensitively to light the lamps are lit, the next lower it goes through the smoke or the spirit flow, which are next to their condition, they may be red or food, down to rekindle they flame will go down as the kidnapping of a lower torch. In this way, also the case with you doing the little flames, which, lest thou be consumed trim humour in its proper subject, it is quite to the matter of efforts to the next disposed, that is to say, to the place of the elder of the flame, straight or surpass the orb by means of the transverse progressing, they depart. Same thing happens to the conquest of parts of the iron, which run to and fro in every direction toward the magnet, drawn by means of another kind of virtue or quality. In fact, every operation in natural things, not just the qualities active and passive, is a mixed body to be referred and the like. Even though, sometimes concur also by a necessary, but not principally. But the fact that by means of the outflow of the parties, which is accompanied by such manner of subjects, it may result from the intake of these things, it indicates that the iron, that a magnet by attracting and with unblushing, and ambrose and so much they more are strengthened by the chaff, for the heat he brings in the greater part of the outflow, and the body rarefied, in virtue of which it is to open the pores. It is also similar judgment on how his rabarbarum draws bile from the ends or sides circumferentialibus animal intestines, when sufficient power is not so much that as soon as I said before it is expelled from the nature of the work, nor the energy to move and not only attracts moisture. This is also in the magnet is not affected by the quality, and the like. A passive or active, the attractive virtue and efficacy, according to the Vulgate kind of action or passion, as it were, is found in the forms of the four elements, is a sign that the iron in him, that it was from the magnet contact, is imbued with the same force of drawing something else iron. If that were so, by the quality of an elementary one, would not happen with this one, heat and cold with the heater accidentally approach subject's absence disappear. It is necessary, therefore, to the outflow of the parts of this is important. Everything from the magnet which flow into the iron influx, is a spiritual substance. Another likely reason for these effects, or it is difficult to make it, and looking well into it, and by this, which on every side, self-consistent, various types of chimeras and dreams, the causes of which others are invented of attraction of this, it is easy to examine. To the same purpose is referred to, and cause of the judgment, that the magnet is said to be an obstacle to this attraction, in like manner, and many kinds of various types of others, which are grown to a certain power of his own disappearing, to dull the power from another, as the sharpening and some other dive in, it is said adamant magnanimity to impress the mind of the deferent. XXIII, on the other hand, the attraction of the magnet from the pole, it is not the cause of it is easy to bring, if it is not true is that which they say, to that land of mountains of the same species to be found greatly, and are large ones, because in fact it is hard to find of persuasion. For let it down, is asked, why let it be done? At any distance this kind of attraction. For it is not in this case we are speaking of the attraction of the magnet is not active, but passive. Is it true magnet pulls, this is not my own. They have the power of so great a distance, and to the mountains, too, if there are such persons, at least if you drag the needle from the torrid zone, or the tropics, they ought to pull the men from our countries of the soldiers, all of which seems ludicrous. Put up, that a magnet attracts iron, when there is nothing intermediate in addition to the air, and by means of a straight line, in the manner that those parts of us went to the regions, where there are the mountains and the crags of the magnet, beyond the northern sea, great of the earth, the swelling intercedes. Therefore, they were dragged to the magnet iron, or, if by reason of the likeness of the draw, a magnet, if the magnet are existing at A, the mountains they were in the 500, are found in the 100 B, or necessarily in the way, so great as is plainly exists between them, as well as the distance between the right line of or AC have been noted, as well as swelling of the earth by the archabe and AC noted. Therefore it appears that in many ways the absolute, the common and famous system, the reasons for this are: a magnet does not have the power to attract the magnet also annex the mountains on account, that would have been great to see the attraction of the magnet portion. Attraction, therefore, we give an account of some of this effect does not, because, as has been said, a reasonable attracted the iron from there, but rather a flight out of antipathy, of that is the mineral of iron, and, indeed, the nature of the contrary, which are of cold, being of the fetus of the earth and on earth for. Consequently it is contrary to them, and flowers, it turns out that pretty much all that are looking are converted to the sun and pursued them by the way of the sun itself, so as not only to see, even though it has been said of the heliotropio in this ratio, but in the narcissus flower, saffron, and numberless other things. These things, therefore, as if the enemy that shall be it alone or to heat, you can safely shall we say to the warring parties to them, and the most opposite to be converted rushed out herself. Epilogue moved some of these things. Locally, therefore, be moved in many. We find the arguments it follows, the first to the consistency and the preservation of life, which is a result of movement, the power of the thing in its proper place in a circular direction for the birth of the soul and of the spirit of the move, as has been said above, second flight in opposite. Thirdly, by follow him that is suited to or of good. Fourth, by the expulsion or extrusion from striking contrast, moreover, contrary to the needy or the appetite. And the fifth is violated by the attraction of matter converted into itself, coinciding with the consent of the natural choice of the sixth by animal power. Lastly, by the violence, which the powers of nature is a hindrance to the study of art, or, 2, and it twists back some other, or even the nature itself, which, while it is strong in one part to something cause motion, the nature of the other of the movable of less strength obstructs and beats down, who are almost always happens, of one such is the case. For the flow of water is impeded by the natural flow of the other, as in the case falling off the sea. The rivers, to the ocean, which come from the flow of the sea through a number of miles towards the fountains of their own people, and allow them to be the very back and forth. The bond spirits, it was said above, is the spirit of others is more gross, others more subtle, inhabit the matter, others and things composite, the simpler the bodies of others in the consist, others by sense objects, others insensible, hence the operations are more active than others, some more difficult, some dull, some adapted, others have been taken away. Also, some according to the people as one, and others according to the workers of another kind of more powerful, whence men were given to the kind of operations and acts and pleasures that they are deprived of. The demons, and on the other side. And while they were around the bodies, an admission is more ready. Penetration of thoughts, since the impressions of some of the internal senses obtrude upon to such an extent, as those things which they themselves suggest, by means of think of ourselves, we seem to sometimes. For it seems that he has a proportionately to their information, and some kind of analogy, and in place of distantia or to the fact that someone is willing to some particular sense, into activity, we need the cry out as if by means of it to be heard to the internal sense, are led into the conceptions of some, but submissiori near at hand there is no need. Then, a shout, the voice, the next enough to whisper in the ears, let them, yes, there is a need. However, a demon, nor to the tones, nor a whisperer, but it penetrates the very meaning of internal as stated above. In this way, they introduce the voices to be heard and I should see and do not only dreams, but also those who are awake, keeping of the thoughts that are known by another scarcely exist at all, and sometimes by riddles, and sometimes to more distinct senses have reiterated the truth, at times, perhaps, in deceiving them. But they are not all things to all are lawful, because it is a fixed series of movements take place in the whole, and in perfect order. And however it may foul a spirit or a demon, and they are looking well into it all as well as all things hold together, for there be more species of those we find to be by far, which they are able to be of sensible things. Hence, and some of them are a kind of brute animals and without the account of wicked men, at the most confessedly live according to below the of human wisdom, as well as about dangerous animals and the poison of men able to injure them. Such a kind of it that he calls the mark, the deaf and dumb, that is, without reason, that no one knows a command and no threats, nor to pray he hears and perceives, and, therefore, incapable of proclaiming that they cast out to them, but they set it sort of by fasting or abstinence and prayer, or the raising of the mind and the sense of the energy of, and to be able to be overcome to be conquered. This is physical, since they thick of the race, as is the food and attractions are liquids denser and terrestrious melancholy, worn away by the lack of food or drugs wisely suited to guard the doctor committed. There is also another kind of timid, suspicious thing, so credulous, that the utterances listens to and understands it, between the possible and impossible, however, does not distinguish suitable and unlikely, those things of which in great distress, is the fantasy of the dreamer, and the manner of men, and such kind of threats, them of death, of the prison, fire, and similar to the sun from the bodies are kept away. There are others, more prudent, of which the more the copper, is the substance of the former is simple, which is no civilization, no religion, no figure of speech being moved, although they make up all these things according to its will, and to men and mock at fear, anger, pretend to religion and the like, are skilled in languages and sciences, but nothing consistently assert the same, inasmuch as the kind of invidious, that the confusion and doubts in the minds and senses of men leading the air of heaven, however, is pure, the bright race, they all agree in the fact that there is a complete good end. Upright men of a friend, to no one's enemies, they are friends of each other, as if from the air, but to others of the enemy and aggressively. But in water and earthly things, or are the enemies of friends or not, such as less rational and therefore more timid, and according to that saying, whom they fear, they hate, and I will gladly they hurt. Fireproof the other hand, that belongs to the gods and heroes are said to be God's ministers, whom they call Kabbalistarim of his chosen people, the seraphim, the cherubim, the prophet from the which she said they psalmist, those who makes his angels spirits, and his ministers a flame of fire, Basil and Origen from which They rightly conclude that it is not at all the angels are incorporeal, but a spiritual substances, that is they most subtle of the body of the living creatures, and that the flames of the fire, which signifies by the fires of the divine revelation. All in all, the order of spirits are before governors, and the princes, the shepherds, the captains, the rulers. Step by step, in whose possession the wiser and more powerful and the weaker and have dominion over the more ignorant as they command, and these commands are not eternal, nor having in so short of solid, like the human, of our life for many reasons, since the life of those are incomparable, as they are easy to reconcile itself a body. The soul is a simple, rather than being composed of contraries, such as ours, their bodies are suffering most easy to defend, as it is capable of air, water, rather than the product of some bodies. The same facility repairs such as air assault, easily torn, and the water had been referring to penetrate, and there is a theatrical and poetic imagination that pervades the place of the shades drawn sword. Aeneas, Virgil them. Perderuus states. Others of the human spirit, while others inhabit the bodies of other animals, other plants, some caught up stones and minerals, and destitute of the spirit of nothing at all, and in understanding, and in no case was appointed to him the spirit of everlasting seat, purchased for, but it fluctuates from one point to another to the spirit end. The matter of the nature or composition, is tossed the spirit of the Son of one and to any other matter, and this is an alteration, change, passion, and at last the corruption, that is, of the parties and from specific parts of the elimination of certain and with a certain composition, for the death of one thing not to accept when there is a dissolution. And yet, there is no breath nor any human body perishes, but only, and of summing up of acts of change is continuous. In accordance with the various acts, which have been since the composition of the various peined, and there are various of loves and hatreds, since the whole, just as has been said, they want to stand to be in the present. Since they understand the other person, or that the result of state and I know that or nothing, the reciprocal of the soul to the body of its own, therefore, a general and a kind of bond is that of love, of in its own, of his own body to the soul. Hence it depend on the diversity of natures and the impact it the bands with which the spirit and the bodies are bound by, and diversity, of which it soon will be we have to discuss, after the analogy of the spirits and the things composed of the I define the proportion of spirits. Porphyry, Plotinus, and the other Platonists, thus the spirits of the bodies of the division, as the purest and most virtuous, who are also being inscribed in the name of gods, are of a fiery substance as to the body, and used to be most simple, the perfectly pure. The latter, however, who provided others consist of the elements of the darker, not without the participation of a more acute of the elements. They consist, for example, air with the fire may have been mixed with the air, the aqueous with the fire of the air, the land, and with the fire of air and water. Substances, however, are for the sake of the body of the invisible things of their rarity. But the land and water of the optional concrete and thickened plane steamed sometimes rendered visible, and in the purer air calmer weather and calmer even appear. And to the mountains he had seen them happen for me to liber and laurels, nor I alone, but frequently appearing inhabitants of that place, which, at times, they are, moderately yet aggressively, the beasts, the abductor, and by hiding them, which they bring back to a second time after a time. He returned to his own stables. The mines and other underground places, such as in the mountains Gabena, news and information that is most frequently enough to meet miners, which will be both annoying and assistance, as well as significant cases. These are referred to this category of whom he kept about Nola to the temple of the gate, into a solitary place, and even the crickets under a kind of cliff, at the foot of the mountain, which was formerly the cemetery pestiferatorum, and in passing by him and to many I have met and experienced pain at night. These were the days of many assailed with stones, who are the least at an interval of most of them from the head and other parts of the body to not by assailing of season with great violence disorients the average interval. Yet they never brought in the physical as well as the harm inflicted upon the same thing to me as well as others. To all those who bear witness of these Sellus, in his book, On the Demon remembers, referring to them who shun the rock labyrinths of stones, of which, however, were laid and empty-handed. Be a demon underground not only sensation, experience, and system, but also a wise and of great and divine a kind. Of the authority he confirms it in the Book of Job, a philosophy and profound. He cursed as of the day where he was born, he uses these words, where he says, "Let the day perish wherein I was born," and so on. And there, after a few sentences, he draws why there is a light given to the miserable, and life to the bitter in soul. Are they? Why did I not perish when I came out of the belly, or as an hiding place, it is not I stopped. Now for one out of sleep and still, and in the sleep of Erequiescarum with the kings and the princes of the earth, which build desolate places for themselves, who filled their houses with silver, the other hand, of Jabba, producing the words out of the mouth of the same which is nothing more expressly to the point. In this way, also, as was said above, there are other spirits shut up in other bodies for certain that distributes these steps in a certain order and justice, and Origen, the demons are counted from Pythagoras and the Platonists. Men of the greatest, and applying them is not the good, but those who were good is practical and the worse which. Therefore, a better life arranged and worse. For this reason, as well as the Christian theologians as well as this very life and the way of a certain rule and the passage of the better ones of the philosophers of the sect, they call it a pilgrimage into the campaign. The same is the judgment of the other classes of consistency. Moreover, in the best state than when it has gone to the soul or spirit of these, in that it is understood a very long time to persevere, and this is what we were saying from the beginning, all the substance of a spiritual, to be brought Back to one thing, all material to three, that the soul is one thing, her God, and the first mind that there is one. Above all things, that the soul of the universe that there is one. To these things all diseases to be a very, it is probable that the demons are bad, and from this place and they. Souls of ecstasy in song and prayer and contemplation were banished from, and opposite to calls upon it. Nor is it denied that there are some men with certain spirits that rule over them, by whose power of certain forms of the disease of dispersion, as they say of the kings of the Persians of Cyrus, and others, who by the touch of a man's thumb grumpy they have healed also, was noised, and is the same insufficient evidence that the kings of France, who of the thumb by the touch of scrofulas care about him, the saliva is said to effect the same as to be able to. The absence of women through the medium of the seventh born of the same parent, of different bodies according to the various kinds of bodily and therefore, are to the demons, and speckled, and different people, and its argument against it is, that the affection they have, lusts, anger, zeal, similar to a passion of a grosser of animals with human feelings, and the things composed of matter, for she was found from. These are the sacrifices, and the deaths of animals, of which the equipment and the smoke is extremely necessary. To take pleasure in they protested that they, and these must be the complexion of our very akintu, from which are others to the other peoples and nations are affected most, but all he detests and walk. Some of them are mentioned by name, of renown, and too powerful, and to another the more plebeian, whom they called gods of the Roman patelars, namely, which they should not be defined on the sacrifices and oblations. Such things, however, it is not incredible to those dishes is so necessary to be a pleasant it is when, they can be for things that are necessary to procure for himself by his own, yet these things are superinventa to their luxury which, without the administration of man to himself by no means ad comparant, for though much better than we know it, cannot, however, moves and changes as well as the many things we are able to spiritualize and to the nobler and more gentle temperament. There are more delighted with a censer in which incense, saffron, musk, amber, and sweet smelling flowers stand long enough, and other degrees of the condition of that said to have been the more excellent, to whom the hymns, the singing of a musical instrument, and smile at. And as for the condition of these is the condition of the gods, by their nature is not in need of us, has not been well according to his deserts caught, or is touched by the wrath of the, for to be affected by ill and well. One of them is from us, which he requires of us, and to take in some way so they can better and more pleasing with each other, and that in the state of being settled, by no means to be most happy, it seems fitting. At the end of the former is firmly be completed and the mind we must hold that the spirit, the soul, divine will, God or the divinity of all things are full and the holy everywhere, and the total is intellect and the soul. But not in all cases affects all things. This implied that the poet of the dogma of the Pythagorean flowing fields of sea and air, tide and stars, a spirit within nourishes, and the whole infused through the limbs. The mind is driven by the mass, and mixes itself with the body the whole. This man and beast, the life of winged, and what the sea bears beneath the sea. He says the same of mysterious sense of the sacred from all the common people at bay, as was said in the psalm, and in the book of wisdom Spirit of the Lord hath filled the whole world, and that which containeth all things, and in another place, I fill heaven and the earth. It differs, however, from the corporeal substance of this kind of substance of the mind, the soul, and in greatness of the spirit, the body is a whole in the whole, and that the whole of the universe, itself, however, is the whole in each part, and of the whole image when he told everywhere, namely all of constituting a kind of, where the more clearly, where there is obscurity, the bonds of spirits. And for the first time about the fact that it is from the three reasons of the agent, matter, and applications. 24. At this point, that the actions should be completed in things, three things are required. Active power is in the agent, or the patient in a subject or disposition of a passive power, which is a kind of aptitude or non-repugnance or inability to resist, all of which are reduced to the one term, namely, the power of matter, and the due application, which is through the circumstances of time, place, and the rest of the run-up, all things. As that in a word, to the agent, matter, and the application. Every action is impeded by lack of these three. Perpetually too, simply speaking, since even if it be perfect wind player is hindered by the imperfection of the tibia, and the application of one to the other is empty. And, therefore, the inability of the matter, he gives. The impotence in an efficient, disagrees within the application. This is what we call the perpetually hindered by a defect in the action of the three. Absolutely speaking, the other hand, looking into the properly, it can be by one person alone, or deficiency to be due to only by two again, but not from the one definitely, but separately by understanding concerning all things, so that when the application is perfect and the flute player, a pipe, however, it falls short of, or in connection with the player exists in the pipe, the application of, however, is hindered. Where, however, the whole idea of efficiency consists in the application, then the first argument concurs with the third, for it is nothing else but sometimes, as drawn by the efficient, and to effect nothing else than to apply. Mat. 26. Not everything is born to suffer from the things, nor to act upon all, but, as was said in natural philosophy, that is from a contrary and action of all, in the contrary, all the passion, nor ever shall be, but disposed, whence it was noised that, in the actions of the active the patient is well designed. Hence it is clear the argument on which the water is mixed with the water and the water through the water, tempered because of the similarity or the sign or the knowledge of, whence after being done, it has been union, is separated from the other by no skill of the other, or for wine, or wine without water, however, can easily be received by water and receives the pure water, so that it becomes the mingling of, but of heat, and because the parts of the air and of the spirit of wine have in themselves something, it does not have the symbol of the all-inclusive, and therefore, according to the least things are not mixed together, there was so notable, but according to the mass of heterogeneous distinctly are preserved in the composite, as we may be able to be separated again greater certainty. Then art, just as it happens in the water of the sea coast, which expresses a certain way the gods are exalted and fresh water, as well as by the vessels of waxen you may worship that, if the mixture would be perfect, would not happen. The other hand, when water is mixed with the oil will never be, because they cling together, and have joined together for parts of oil, which he loves, and hence, neither can penetrate from the parts of water. It is therefore noted that, in terms of the attempt to call the union of the body with the body, nor, for all the components. 27. But we must appreciate is, therefore, to the position of its parts, the composition, and the difference. Since he was completely impenetrable by the whole by means of one of its sides is to say, by the other one is not allowed, for so it is in all men, as is evident in the stones and the trees, or in the flesh itself, which are penetrating each orb by means of one part or side of the inmost shrine than by the other, as is evident throughout the length of the fibers in the effluent of the humours had been rooted, because it is easier throughout the length of the wood are torn, but the moisture penetrated more broad than long, since the pores between fibers grapples with the pipes or ducts share. 28. Therefore, not only to look at the parts, quality, and location, but also the condition of the form of the whole, for there are certain things which are to be admitted by the passions of the solution is an inborn aptitude to be received by one subject to another, just as an astonishment is caused by the bee benumbed in the hand of the fisherman, not in the nets, they were, and, as he was wont to play some of the comic, the fire of love was burning with insatiable lecherous heart, chest cold, and rawhide existing. 29. Similarly, in the case of thunder, and sometimes dissolve steel or steel sheath nothing altered, so it happens, wonderful, most beautiful girl in Naples in a noble species, of which only the hair near the womb burned. This report, wood burning barrel, wine, or leaf standing frozen on the outside. And the last, which is in most things of this kind take place, because the hidden design of the atoms of that kind of fire, which is active in one, and so if he were active in another. These two bear relation of emperors and of the poets be marked when the laurel and the eagle, for this reason, because these lightning would never have grasped at all, as it were, so to Apollo, Jupiter, a friend, and princes and poets. But in regard to men, all of which is not the same to him, what has happened to the girl, is standing in the fact that not all of the system are of the same complexion and temperament, and the same admit the quality of the spirit, that even in some cases so the mind also exists, in order to hinder and reign, more rule over the winds and other bad weather. So, too, are to be referred to the wonderful things that happen in the bodies of a certain complexity, where some of them are from the privilege of the whole species, and there are some from certain of the particular prerogative of, on account of the differences of countless things that are in them. In such cases, therefore, the effect of begging or species or individuals of the virtues in order to watch on the Magi, and the generals not to have provided the nobles and friends, and commended the ministers in charge of armies, and for military service and to join them, but fortunate than those who have been accustomed to such perils to escape. Even so, some plants and minerals through suspension and the driveway, and a different kind of application of certain prerogatives of winning as a means of contact with the opinion that the generals would crown secured by lightning, do not fear. 30. To this we reference the fact that in certain animals there are certain poisons, as is generally the man of hemlock, which is exceedingly pleasant. The food is to take a general way, that it was quite all of her ping fiant. In like manner, in the differences between the nutrients of poison and the antidote for various species is characteristic of watch. Hence it is not a little bit of magic and medicine in order to distinguish the principle as the summing up of the differences and reasons of health and of the principles of disease, and by changing of habits or dispositions or of the same adjustments, through the application of an external object. The chemist, so that the water also knows how to act on the property, still remains a strong man, so that in the steel, silver, brass, and lead, into gold, however, by no means, again as quicksilver as possible teaspoon of oil, which is completely divorced from the gold and put off. Accordingly, it is to break the power of vervains past you. Juice a stone in the bladder or seed, which, however, by no means to flesh and bone, and the membrane seems to be a violent in other parts of the body. 32. There are those who have relation to the looseness of these reasons or the distress of the apertures, which, indeed, in some cases easy granted, it by no means even the greatest importance, and the majority of it is true, as it is in enumerating all of them. For neither does reason is that by which the water may penetrate a strong one than the other, for the sake of greater rather the laxity of the apertures. In like manner also vervains the spirit, who is opposed to the counter, but not the bones and the flesh, even though they may be more let down the pores. And what he will say of the adamant, the fire of spirit, and not in pieces, with which, indeed, from the most subtle of bodies and penetrativissimo, which, however, is penetrated by the goat's blood? Tarry for a night in it, then, is the general reason that not all things doth unto them all, nor is all the same character according to the differences of all republics, and effects and cases, is a reason for these things to be taken by them, with their own required differentius, and that if these names are not secret, they are laid on to or forms, nor are sensible to the eye or to the touch. Let them come, nor ratiocinables the origin of which was from the of the eyes, and burned up the difference, and definitely may be had, so as to be able to say about these other than that they are, the other hand, with not even the demons, on account of what we judge to discuss it easy to set, if they wish to be with us to define our words and the senses, which are signified by the words of our own. According to the bond from voice and song. 33. The second of the bond from the reason for this is the conformity of the numbers to the numbers, the measure. And the measure, the importance of for a moment, where does he get to have the effectiveness of the rhythm's end? Songs of those who are said to be very great. Accordingly, some people are more affected by a sense of tragedy. Some comically harmony, there are some generally to all the affected, some as of something they recite a barbarous emperor, who, musical instruments, I would rather have heard this so skillfully designed, he says that he discussed with the horse's flowing mane and hear him, who is so obviously wrong and unworthy human aspect endowed with by this very fact he is convicted. On the other hand, is not only a song, the harmonious, but under a more general, a call we understand, if indeed potent, and some have found that there is, canzoni, or the songs seem to have a discrepancy of more than they harmony, and nearly such was the soul of that brutish creature, of man, what kind of horse neighing of number would have been able to bend more easily, sensitive to the harmony which it pertains, as well as to the eyes. Shall be chaste to the love of other numbers is conquered, with other human, while the other's dog-like mind is as the condition, and they are different for every single species of beauty of the difference. Therefore, just as in the proverb is from the ass to the lyre, not all are suitable for all the songs, and so that the souls of various types of a harmonic varieties, thus, also of various wizards and the variations of the spirit of the bandage up. 34. However, these bonds not only this, to him, are tenacious, the quantity and access, or that are perceived through hearing in the soul, it is the voice, as Marci, and the Scilli, and the voice of the most potent in a serpent, also to the matter of structure would arrive not, concealed from a tale-bearer, but also, by means of the analogy of spirit to spirit, and bound to bind, the effect of bonds is finished, bewitched charmers not always welcomed by the words or the exception sensibly affected, and soon. 35. Here is the number one pitch or the appearance of another word numbers confuse and baffle, and so the wolf, which serverize commonly, some bound to lose sight of the voice of the spirit, nor can they easily form words. The reference instrument of lambskin with the drumskin wolves away at the sound of any other sounds forceful blows assailed, for the spirit that is in some sort of dead skin, he was able to overcome it and to control the sharing of antipathy and privileges, which was in the living, which is related by or whether it is so I have not tried this, yet the likelihood and has the note, which, however, is not altogether by the reason of life unto life and of the species to the species, and the ass his the wolf is afraid of nothing since it is perhaps less than a sheep, as well as by his wiles liable to the took a timbrel, however, of his skin, perhaps the beat of the wolves, but to just check, for the most, however, the thickness overcome. 36. related to this two woolyos of the stringed instruments from the nerves of the sheep and sinews are never in unison. It is also common for many people, as two of the harp or lyre equally cool if you were the one closer to another bell rings, the music of one of the other strings, not only in harmony, but the move is equally uncertain. This is very reasonable. It also happens that both voice and gesture or like some kind of a mind affected by the presence of one another, giving rise to indestructible friendship. There are those whom we hate seen in the temple at random, as well as without a cause we love, at times, and this hatred and love are reciprocal, but sometimes it does not, but that came from the one into the other in a certain predominance according to one kinds of emotions which is hindered by another species which is in the feelings of the other, just as the species have a certain feeling of love are drawn into those of one small bird and the little dogs, which, however struck by the fear that we avoid and hate. 40. Belong to this category of prayers and speeches, which equal or exceed some of the principal and they solicit they, where, have no effect, nor the pretense of justice, notions, or their good behavior and alluded to, which, at times more powerful, may of one fool and buffoon before us, to the voices of this sort that is sometimes wiser than the minds of princes are accustomed to being more adapted to become entangled in the bonds, as in the July 3. Pope found that praying, weeping abolished, throwing out, if somebody in jest or otherwise gracefully after kiss the feet forward, hoping to get from him all that he could. The art of enchantment, therefore, looks at you and at appearance of to the spirit of the bond, which is through song or poetry, no matter what I do to is to persuade and advise against the orators, or to move the affections. They treat of this enormous purposely omitted and the other part of the art of political hypocrisy, hidden in the bosom of the wise men or philosophers, or are exciting, which, however, a large part of the complex of Aristotle in the rhetoric to Alexander is to say, whatever was provided for the two heads of consideration is reduced, the other that he consider the charmer that he is, and what becomes them what is fitting, the other what magic spells. Or by binding to please you, smile at them, his one character considerations, the state, make up, practice, unravel, and to bring all of which at present is not the place. The third type of bonds of view. 41. In a dream, too, the spirit is overcome, as is occasionally found above is merely touched upon, as they forms in different ways, before the eyes perceives. Hence, they depart from the eyes and through the eyes of the active and passive enchantments they go into, hence, that I do not know the eyes of a man cursed my tender lambs. Beautiful, too, to throw off the appearance of the affection of love, contrary abomination and hatred. Beyond this, in affections of the soul and spirit, and by means of a thing and the body itself, which is under the rudder of the soul and the spirit of contemperamento was stopped, and was transferred to. There are also other kinds of emotions, which is also affect by some means or through the eyes of the body itself are taken and immediately which excite us to sadness and sorrow, or the sympathy of a sad sum of the faces, as it were, of the causes of the facts. There are others who are also loaded them worse than the impressions of the mind and the body through the eyes, but not evidently by the things that we are able to judge, most effectively, however, move in a certain things which are in us, namely, by the manifold to the spirit and the soul, since it is one soul in the whole body. Although they may flourish, and especially to one person, all the members supply, yet, because the spirit of the whole and the whole soul, and all the parts of the whole are made alive in a certain, the reason of many of spiritual affections must be referred to something else, that he lives in us, and knows the fact that in those things is affected by and is disturbed by which the smallest we were shocked and is affected, and at times harmful. Then we are touched and worse for it from those over whom we do not feel the blow, than those whose we feel, was seen in the appearance of disorder, and many have heaped upon the sense of so do not do it in the open by the eye and extrinsic sensory powers, which, however, was mortally will also affect the more deeply immersed in, of which the immediate to the internal sense of the spirit, as it were, meaning to another, and an animal reports. Hence it is not so easily, because some of the Platonists themselves in opposition to all the Pythagoreans, who form one man. There are many they decide to animals as it were, per se, are living things, whose sometimes for one slain, or primarily, for a long time others survive. 42. To judge, therefore, for those only to be injured or be affected by the visible appearance of us, which only induce the manifest disturbance of the senses and of the mind, there is a manifest stupidity is, they do nothing but blows, or more of damaged, if any one thinks that only to those who feel or felt more, when in fact we may have had experience of a number of the thorns grew around the needle or puncture the skin of a cannon to inflict discomfort and pinched, which was neither sword nor were compelled to out of one side to another, it is felt at last of which became still worse, without the sense of the parts of the body, however, the harm done to that point to which it penetrates the moment. In this way, they give much cause the death of the soul spirit of stealth by means of the eye, to imprison them and to insist on, even though it do not lead to disturbance of greater or lesser weight to their objects, as they see certain gestures or compelled to tears or emotions, filled with the blood of others looking for a retail or a carcass of a swoon driven, of which matter there is in addition to the cause of the affection of other things through the eyes of devanciens. The fourth band is from the imagination. 47, 48, whose function is to receive them from the senses be brought down and, indeed, to contain and to compose them, and they divide, is exactly what happens in two ways, in one way, from a will, or by the election of the imagines them, such as is the role of poets and painters, and of them that make up the apology, and the with the reason, the species composing all kinds, by any other means outside the will and the choice of. And so it is in two ways, either by means of cause I also while choosing involuntary, either from the external power. And for this twofold, either mediate, that the man who by means of words or by the spectres, or by the hearing disturbances in a dream brings in, or immediate, that with the spiritual, the rational, or the demon, who acts on the imagination by means of dreams or even by vigils, so the internal species and that moveth, for something, would seem to have taken hold of the external senses. It possessed some seem to see some of the shows and hear certain words and phrases, which I think really instilled from foreign backgrounds, and so outrageous and constantly assert that it is true that he had seen and heard is true, when it was not their mistake, but the plan. For the things that they hear, which they see, however, that the appearance of phantasibulum, the internal sense, by means cast up to him, the same thing by the sound of the external, and the external form in a dream through the ears had brought forward that he sees it is to them, and the intentions of the internal senses they deem to be the things themselves. In this way, it happened that he will or not even to the sounder sense, to be recalled by those standing around, of whom I rather to them that they would prefer to promote one's own imagination, of whom I truly think that the deaf and the dumb, a medical man bear relation to the mania and melancholy, these very things, which are called by the same people watching dreams. 49. The material in this bond is not clear that the principle that the gross and outrageous obstinacy of some of the common medical opinion that it is not clean, efficient, blind, or diabolical kind, for their part, maintain a theologian, but both concur, materially, indeed, a melancholy humor, which we call the bath of the Saturnalia, or the eating place of demons, but also for an efficient cause, and the cause of the spirit itself, possessed of the devil, who since it is not at all an incorporeal substance, since they seem to have been much affected, animals and those endowed with the most serious the demons, even though a spiritual substance, more subtle and less accessible to the senses of the nature of the body is a tribute to whom, in what kind of animals it has been said that just as many are to be found the species, than there are of the living, to composite and sensible things. As, therefore, for a specific number seed is in place, which fitted the foregoing rules, as it runs up the soul of the thing defined, or out of it are, as it were rushed out the form or of the living animal would be, certainly produces and makes to emerge, so that from this seed is born the olive tree, out of him the dog, out of him a human being, the body, so too in this case these things are born, or so one complexionated more conveniently, however, those, from which a poet at this point, corn, and there are coming more happy, then grapes, temperature and so the animal spirit or out of a clear complexion of the heart or of the brain. The unhealthy or disturbance to, as it were, in their own fields and from his own seed, the bearer of the good or the evil spirits and the principles of intentions. Hence, a kind of mutual consequence is, that such things should the bodies of such persons, and such souls bring forth the consistency of such bodies and they, in accordance with the substantial, which they call, and specific differences in subsistence, so to come here and then came. The others should follow the rule that the addition of accidental characteristics of the body or the subject of a furious wind, which is certainly out of the way, both enchantment, the rhetoric, and friendly, and they conviction was besieged recruit medical and evacuation or expulsion of harmful the material and the purgative drugs, as well as the advantages of a sunny, solar, and the harmony of human life, fuel, material and improve the spirit of the subject, or worse, that sometimes passes in complexity, mitigate temper. Thus neither of these works the inwards, and the spirit of the living creatures were thus pursue after, nor without the spirit assumes a body. To these things, then, whether it be good or a wicked or for a specific rationale of establishing a material principle or out of the notion of the species is required, and according to the type of the formal or efficient cause. In the meantime, it is reasonable enough to cure confusion, delusions, bound by this agreement, and to resolve internal simple fluids, cleaning and simple enough for their daily bread, not for that reason. However, it is concluded that, to conclude some of the fat of Minerva, a physician who has produced a number of nonsense than he could under the title of the marvels of nature concerning the hidden letters and syllables to decipher what, who, from the fact that by the draught, and with amazing intentions of this kind of humours, vacuationem free and orderly fashion with the kind of spirits are expelled, and extruded, he concludes them to be nothing else than the humours, be just as we might be able to say that his excellence, which is of a number of the souls of through the draught, he forced to go away from the body, as well as the soul itself, or the excrement of moisture, too, should think of, or if the want of meat and drink to his own house, and he is forced to leave the country for the sake of medical ignorance, and the open nature of the colors and words, do you suppose him to be nothing else than it is of the race of those things that exclude each other? All of these methods are bound together and bound by a sense of when it happens, most of the physician or the wizard stop the work of the imagination. The most outstanding of this is the gate and easy access to the actions and passions and affection for all of them, who are in the animal, and this binding is followed by the binding of higher power, which is thought. The bond of the fifth, which is from the cogitative 51, is essentially a light fantasy bond, if the bond strength is not thought to double it. For those spectres, which the unlearned, foolish, credulous, and superstitious lie of talent and they bind the bandage up his mind, he is laughed at, despised and seen as a pointless of the shadow of a sober and well, from the birth of man, and endued with genius. Hence all workers or doctors or wise men or the previous accomplish nothing without faith, and the number of previous work. At this point, we have assumed to a more universal, according to the faith of reason, than to be taken by the individual, and from all of these 52, these things are arranged and in certain unsettled, as it were, to prior to the powers of the well-disposed, and from others, as it were troubled state of mind. The other hand, they do a lot of the ties, which are out of the mouth or eloquent, or, from the species from which a certain disposition of the rises and fostered in the imagination, which alone is the gate of the internal things and of all of the emotions is the bond of his chains. Hence the King James Version is the view of Hippocrates, the most effective of physicians, that it was he whom many believe, and this is for a great many, or conquer or to speak or the presence of a report, and not only as a physician, under some other title or some other kind of magic, but with some kind of power, if he be promoted in the operator will be able to be held in the margins of the imagination scarcely any other means. 53. And they believe theologians, and they concede and preach about the man who is able by himself to do all things, yet they believed not that he was not able to take care of them that waited on him, of which the whole idea of impotence is referred to the imagination, which was not able to bind compatriots, and for that knew of that race, and a low education, despised and made fun of the doctor and the divine, hence the common no prophet is accepted in his own country. Is, therefore, easier for some people to bind them, with whom less is known, as appears from the opinion of and the provision of faith, of which the power of the soul, indeed, in a sense, prepares for it, opens it, he explains, as if to the sun in conceiving, the windows to open them, which they would otherwise have been closed, leaving his post, access is given to them, the impressions of which ligatures the art of the seeker, by inflicting what follows as bonds, which are hope, compassion, fear, love, hatred, indignation, anger, joy, patience, contempt of life, of death, of fortune, and all whose force is from the heart into the body of an alterative, pass over. And how shall they left those enumerated links species, which are the opinion of the faith, and follow after be altered so as to consider is not very profound speculation. Now as to what concerns the powers of the soul, to the more spiritual the things which follow, namely, to the memory, reason, experience, understanding, and the mind. It's important not to pursue the present investigation, if indeed it does not overflow into the body of powers, nor the acts of those they alter, but the whole is so much worth as originally before the cogitative in the powers of effectively and foremost by the thought. From all the magical power of active and passive, and the bonds are subject to the point where he kind of magic, and that he even claims that Plotinus, the wise and the foolish, consistency that can be bound by the principles of nature, but exists in the subject that can be a source of back off a magical or ejaculations, since, indeed, as has been said above, all things do not penetrate into the things. Or now we mingle all things with all men, as the oil with the water is not mixed up. In this way, bears witness to Plotinus, Porphyry, in his life of Plotinus by himself, and he confirms it, that the evil deeds from an Egyptian, to which endeavored to set the binding and bewitched Plotinus, author of the very thing they are turned. And these are the words were spoken in general concerning those chains. N.